Welcome to Billionaire Business. My name is Ian Fishwick. I'm a serial entrepreneur in the UK tech industry, and I've done 43 mergers and acquisitions. And my friend?
And I'm Chris Godsmark, and I've been advising on mergers, acquisitions, fundraisings, IPOs for the last 2 decades, often with a valuation of £100 million up to £1 billion or more.
You floated from memory to about 145, 165 million.
Yeah.
And then you went up 10 times after that. There's not many stock market floats that have ever done that in history.
We knew we could get involved in this and take it to market quicker than anybody who had scale.
People think that a visionary looks like some young kid in California. The truth is, it looks like you. In this series, we're interviewing all sorts of interesting people, but this is the real deal. What I mean by that is the two guys you're about to meet took a business from 3 million turnover to almost 1.5 billion valuation. There are not many people ever in UK history who's done something like that. There are loads of businesses that seem to get to 1, 2, 3, 4 million turnover. But how did these guys break through that glass ceiling, and what can we learn from them? It's a massive pleasure. Chris and I have known these two guys for a long time. This is the story of Gamma, which is one of the UK's great success stories. And we want to say welcome to the former Chief Exec, Bob Falconer, and his trusted sidekick, the former Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Richard Bligh. Hello, guys.
Hi. Hi.
And Ian, this really is it's a rags to riches, back to rags, and then back to riches again story. I mean, that doesn't happen twice very often. And the starting point was a company up in Scotland called Atlantic Telecom, which built a network back in the 90s. It grew very rapidly. In the dot-com boom, it got to a crazy valuation. And then, like everything after the dot-com boom, the price and the valuation collapsed. What happened next?
Well, the original founder was another individual called Phil Corbishley in the very early days. And he's recognised that when things go down, they often go further down than their intrinsic value. So there was something like, not just on Atlantic Telecom, but on a number of businesses that went bust. He was able to pick up assets that at purchase level were worth about £200 million. And he bought that for less than 10 million. So assembled effectively a national telecoms network for under £10 million.
Whoa, hang on. Right, so there's a massive lesson here straight away.
Yeah.
Every time what you're saying is there's a big crash. If people are ready and watching, there's a huge opportunity in that crash. I mean, that's unbelievable. 10 million quid to buy 200 million quid of assets.
Okay, so acquired those assets. I joined shortly thereafter, actually. And the next task was we need to make use of the assets, because clearly these assets have a running cost, and we've got to start covering the running costs. And the only way to do this at the time was to do something called wholesale calls, which essentially is taking up calls coming into the UK from international carriers and distributing them through the UK, which we were able to do. Very low margin, but high volume business. Big market though. So we were a very late entrant into what was still, even then, a dying industry, but nevertheless, it was a huge industry. So that was where we kicked off. And then one of the large carriers, the large Swedish carrier, Telia, decided to pull out of the UK because its costs were, frankly, I guess, too high. A lot of expats and so forth residing in the UK. Margins were very tight. So they wanted to exit, but they wanted to do it gracefully. And they had around 30-odd million pounds worth of similar business selling to resellers or retailers. So basically, there's a deal done with them for £1, effectively, to say, look, you can go gracefully, but we'll take that traffic and we'll put it on our network. And we believe we can run that profitably. And of course, we did. So relatively quickly.
But the interesting thing about this is that you've sort of got the assets. You're in an enormous market. I mean, the telecoms market is billions and billions and billions of pounds. But you're trying to figure out, you just having the asset and paying what we would say peanuts for it doesn't mean you've got a business, does it? So you're trying to figure out what to do with it. And the products that you're sort of starting with are not necessarily very exciting product. You're just trying to get something onto the network to make some money. Is that really
that's
where
exactly
you were?
right?
And
And
they were the
Richard,
most basic products you could enter the market with, to be blunt.
But to be fair, you had quite spectacular success quite quick. So within 3 years, you'd gone from 3 million to how big were you by then?
within 3 years, we were up probably around 60, 70 million,
Yeah, I would say.
that sort of level.
I mean,
So-
you said that as though that's normal.
Okay. Well,
I don't think that is normal. From 3 to 70 million in 3 years. Wow.
well, we're in a big market. I mean, initially, because we had the assets at low cost, we could sell on price. So we did initially sell on price to get the volume. And once we built the volume up, we then tried to extract some margin from that. But we're talking about margins less than 10%. So a very tight business.
This is less than 10% before you paid the staff, and
Exactly.
this is just the
that's
sort
gross
of,
that's gross margin.
which is not a lot.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot. And you've got operating costs and so forth, and maintenance and all that sort of thing going on. So the question was, how do we differentiate ourselves in this market? How do we get growth? And there were a number of ways. One key way was this was our only market. This was all we did. Now, if you looked at some of our competitors, we had, I think, Richard, you were saying about
I think we
15?
had 15 significant competitors back at that time
Wow.
who had significant scale advantage over us.
So we're talking about names like Cable and Wireless, BT, Colt, Energis,
Energis, yeah.
whole string
I
of.
suppose the difference is, whilst they're miles bigger than you, because you bought all these assets for like next to nothing, you didn't have the cost structure that they had.
We didn't, but there's also one key word that we didn't have that they had, which was legacy IT. So we had the opportunity to really differentiate on service.
What do you mean in terms of their internal systems?
By building really good information systems, billing systems, suitable for our products
See, that's,
and
that's
our
an
market.
interesting point already, which we've talked about before. Some of these giant companies, it takes them ages and ages to change their IT systems. So often, they're a lot more old-fashioned than you think you are when you go on the inside.
100%. And bear in mind, a lot of those large competitors became large through acquisitions. So they probably had 10 billing systems under the bonnet. We managed to create
Because
one.
they've never integrated those various
Correct.
businesses they bought.
Gave us a huge advantage.
And
presume-
linked to that, one of the ways we were able to get margin out of this was that typically in that industry at the time, around 1.5% to 2% of all telephone calls failed. They went into something that the industry called suspense. In other words, they never connected. And that was just forgotten about. But that's 1.5% to 2% of revenue. That's bad enough in its own right. But that was more like 30% of margin because you didn't get the revenue on the asset for those calls. So 30% of margin was being lost. So we went off on a pitch to say, we're going to bill every call, and that was a mantra within the company. And every call that went into suspense, we dug into why it went into suspense. And not only were we in most cases able to stop that happening again, but we found problems inside the network that we could fix, that improved the quality of the service and so forth.
See,
And all that made a big difference.
That's a massive interesting point, because when I set up a business that was selling the types of stuff that you were doing, I started with no systems, and therefore I developed from day one something that was way ahead of what the norm was, and I had miles less people than anybody else. It sounds like you effectively did the same thing at the Telecoms carrier end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and our big competitors, the market that we were in wasn't their prime market, it was a secondary market for them. So companies like BT, for example, have got their own sales force, got their own capability. They want to sell through their own sales force directly. If they've got some spare capacity, they will sell it into the wholesale market. And they'll sell it quite cheap, but they won't focus on it. They won't necessarily stay in it. They won't necessarily give it the quality of service or staff or support that it needs. But for us, that was our only market. So we view was we make that work. And I'll give you one example of why we wanted to make it, because one of our differentiators was to make it easy to do business. Do you remember that, Richard?
I do,
And
indeed.
we had Tracy, didn't we?
Yeah,
We were talking-
the mythical Tracy. She didn't
And
exist.
who was Tracy?
This is an imaginary person, is it?
Correct. So Tracy was our view, if you like, or the persona who worked in one of our channel partners, our resellers. And it's Friday afternoon. It's coming to the end of the working day. somebody's just landed a really big order, and then she needs to put that on a wholesale platform. She needs to provision that order. We absolutely wanted to be the platform that she would always use, because it wouldn't take her very long. She'd be able to do it well
Before she left.
she left.
And she had a choice. I mean, the key thing was she had a choice.
Probably
of companies
at the time
to use.
4 or 5 different users, different
Right.
providers. So we wanted to be the easiest to do business with at the time.
So you're searching for a point of differentiation from the beginning, and initially the differentiation was around ease of use, you know, knowing your customers and that. But from a product perspective, the market's huge. There are hundreds and hundreds of different products in the market. Did you sort of sit down strategically with a whiteboard and say, yeah, where are we going where other people, these 14 other people who are competing with us, aren't so strong, or how did that come about?
Well, I guess what came before that, maybe worth mentioning, was that we did bid for one big piece of wholesale business, which was a company called Tiscali. And people might remember
That's a name from the
Tiscali.
past, isn't it?
Tiscali
I'm
at the
far too
time.
young to remember that.
Tiscali owned AOL service. It was part of the Tiscali brand. And they
AOL,
sold-
who remembers AOL?
And they were very high volume in the residential market. They went out to tender and we bidded for that. And one of the requirements in the tender was the quality of the billing, because they wanted the billing to be high quality and accurate. And we were able to outstrip all our bigger competitors on quality alone. And we won that deal. So we went from 30 million turnover to near on 100 million turnover in a leap. Very, very low margin business. Yeah, and we'll come back to that later actually as to what that meant. But very low margin business, but it gave us about 100 million of revenue. That took us to a point to where we were saying, you know, when we took the business on, our shareholders, some of whom came from the shipping industry, their view of what we were doing was, well, we sort of bought a tanker and we're going to fill it up with stuff and then we're going to sell it once it's full. So we were saying the tanker is nearly full, yeah? But then it was a point of decision, do they sell it or don't they? So
What was clearly your investors and their attitude is quite key to it. What were they like? Where were to work with?
So we had, I was going to say in hindsight, but I think we recognised this at the time. We had a really huge advantage with our shareholders because they were from the Far East and they were only interested in where's Gamma going to be in 18 months' time. They weren't
So they were very forward-looking.
all the time. That was always the question.
yeah.
Last month's management accounts were bordering on irrelevant. It was what is it you guys are trying to do? And then when we got going back to the shipping analogy, when we knew the ship was going to be full, that's when we had to sit down and say, what's the next step?
But because that was the interesting bit. You went from 3 million to 100 million spectacularly quickly, and then you said, we're in the wrong part of the market, we need to pivot, which is an incredible decision to make when you've grown so quickly.
Yeah.
So just take us through how you pivoted then into voice and internet.
Well, yeah, everybody was advising that we should sell because the business obviously had some intrinsic value, and it was making a contribution, not a big one, but it was a positive contribution, and we were generating some cash. But the shareholders really encouraged us to say, we quite like what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the alternatives? So at that particular time, there was a lot of publicity around BT. This is about 2007, 2008. We were saying we're going to transition the whole of BT to something called 21st Century Network. And that was a big splash everywhere. And we looked at it, what was involved, and we thought, actually, because we're a bit smaller and a bit tidier and a bit neater, and we've got good IT, as Richard says, we can do this far quicker than they could, you know, and at much less cost, obviously. So we presented that to the board, saying we can pivot this business from being, if you like, you know, we were a late entrant to a sunset business. You know, that's what we did. It was big, but it was the dying business. Late entrant to that. We can actually pivot to be an early entrant into the next generation.
For the audience, can I just do some context here for a second? Right. Today, many of us are still trying to persuade consumers and businesses to do their voice over the internet rather than conventional telecoms networks. Consumers will understand things like WhatsApp, the more complex stuff, as we know, for businesses. This is 20 years ago. So People think that a visionary looks like some young kid in California. The truth is, it looks like you. I mean,
But we were younger.
Yeah, we're like 20 years younger.
But people forget, don't they? I mean, at that point, broadband. It's hard to remember the world before broadband, the world of dial-up internet, and lots of people watching this,
I mean,
they won't remember
this
it.
was a visionary decision.
That period, wasn't it, where broadband was just becoming ubiquitous.
But voice over...
people were still making voice calls. When they phoned someone, those calls were going through huge switches in big sort of installations, BT exchanges.
100 years of investment.
WhatsApp didn't exist at that point, did it?
Correct. But voice over IP was starting to be talked
what that is.
about.
You can't use terminology.
So voice over the internet, voice over internet protocol to be specific, was being talked about. So it wasn't like we came out with a product set that nobody in the industry had even heard of.
There was Skype, Richard, wasn't there?
There was Skype.
People would ring Australia on Skype.
It was being talked about, but as you know, in our industry, things get talked about years before they became a reality. But we knew we could get involved in this and take it to market quicker than anybody who had scale. We knew
just at that point, Richard, for a minute, because I think there's an absolutely massive key lesson here. When you get these giant industries that are kind of at an inflection point about to change technology, what you guys spotted, I think, is that these big oil tankers, no matter what industry it is, these giant companies, it's actually quite hard for them to move to the next generation. And therefore, there's a window of opportunity for somebody like you guys to say, actually, we'll beat them to it and we'll become the market leaders. Is that fundamentally what you did?
Yes, exactly.
Completely what we did. And we never had the... If you remember the old Hewlett-Packard thing about one of their success was they were quite comfortable cannibalising their product sets. Well, a lot of the telcos we were up against were very uncomfortable about being innovative and cannibalising their product sets.
They didn't want to sell new stuff because they make such money on the old stuff.
They're making so much money on the old stuff.
So when BT looked at replacing ISDN with a thing called a SIP trunk, the first discussion that I'm sure they had at the time, I wasn't there clearly, was we can't possibly afford to lose that margin with this unproven voice over internet.
Always got an incentive to sell the old stuff for as long as possible because they're making lots of money.
So fundamentally in a business would have what's called a PBX in its premises, which distributed the calls around the building.
It's basically an electronic box in a cupboard somewhere.
Computer
with a bunch
down
of
in the
wires.
basement, connected to all the telephones and so forth. A business would have that, but it also have data lines going out, obviously, for its data services, and it'd have something called ISDN, but fundamentally the telephony lines separately going out and paying separately for each significantly. What we were offering is saying you can carry it all in a data line and substantially reduce the cost and improve the service and get extra features and facilities. We made a bigger profit and we'd knock 20% off your bill. It was an easy sell. But
so you very quickly became the market leader in voice over internet, right? You stole a march on them, and then you decided to float in, what was it, 2014 or something like that, right? Now, I'm interested in what caused you to do that, right? I mean, fascinatingly, you floated from memory to about 145, 165 million, and then you went up 10 times after that. There's not many stock market floats that have ever done that in history, right? But what caused you to float at that point? Was it just to give the investors a chance to get their money back, or what was it?
Well, the reasons for float were broadly threefold. One was the investors had been in for over 10 years.
Yeah.
They didn't want to exit, but they wanted to partially sell down, understandably. So that was one reason. Secondly, it would be good for the staff because we could incentivize the staff with stock options and so forth. And also, we had entered the public sector market in the interim period, which took a long time because you have to go through all the hoops that you need to do in the public sector and in the enterprise market. And we'd won some very substantial deals with FTSE 100 companies and so forth. And being a public company adds a lot of credibility because clearly you've got the governance in place, you've got the transparency, and that's very reassuring. And we found that, being a public company, and it certainly proved to be the case, was very helpful.
I've never used that pitch myself, honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly helped.
At this point in the show, we wanted to just pause for a minute and tell you about our sponsor for this series of Billionaire Business. Nets International is a global systems integrator and solutions provider with over 40 years of worldwide expertise in telecom, digital and infrastructure solutions. Nets operates in 7 countries with 3,000 plus projects delivered across 26 nations worldwide. From fibre and mobile network rollouts to enterprise IT, cloud, cybersecurity, automation and managed solutions, Nets delivers smarter, faster and scalable solutions for its customers. With over 1,000 certified and skilled professionals and their own Nets Academy, Nets not only builds infrastructure but also offers managed services and flexible resource outsourcing to help businesses scale with confidence. Recognised as Cisco's Emerging Partner of the Year and Best Fibre Services Provider in the UK, Nets International is the trusted partner driving digital transformation and leading the charge in integrated solutions worldwide. But in terms of the sort of journey from, let's say, 2007 to the float, and then post the float, the shares did very well. I mean, they sort of, over many, many years, which again is really unusual. I mean, sometimes they do well for 1 or 2 years and then they have a rocky ride. It sounds really easy. I mean, so far, what you're telling us, what were the sort of bumps along the road to get to that sort of revenue in the low hundreds of millions? Was it as straightforward as it sounds?
I think.
Let me give a more specific one, because I mentioned that. Sort of, one of the real problems of scaling this kind of business is you weren't selling to consumers, you were selling to businesses, right? So you can't use like social media. You've got to go and visit them and talk to them. And to get really big, you need thousands of sales guys. But obviously, you can't afford thousands of sales guys. So that could have been a massive bump on the road. What did you actually do?
I think we realised very early on that the best way to get our product set to market was using channel partners.
What does that mean?
Using other companies, resellers, that take our product, package it themselves, and then sell it to their customers.
So for those who are not used to this market, every town in the UK has got 1 or 2 IT and telecoms companies that looks after all the local businesses.
Correct.
It was them that you were selling
It was those sorts of people, and it was also the sorts of people that sell to a specific vertical market. So there's a company out there that sells telecoms and IT and specialises in solicitors' practices or dentists or
GPs or
GPs, and that was our route to market. And I think, looking back over that time period, one of the things that stood us in good stead was actually life was pretty simple, in the sense that we were a product company selling to resellers, channel partners, who then sold on to businesses.
Is that how you saw yourself, a product company?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And those channel partners, by definition, they will always have the best relationships with those customers, because BT can't have a great relationship with a firm of architects in a small town,
often
right?
Often deeply personal relationships. They knew the people. They were their friends.
Many were geographical, and there were companies, Southwest Telecom. And Southwest Telecom sponsored the rugby, I think, in Exeter.
Yep.
They were really focused on Devon and Cornwall.
But what I was going to say, they can't afford to let their customers down. You're the new kid on the block, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to convince those local businesses that you're not going to let them down. How difficult was that to do?
With the new products, the voice over internet protocol products, that took time, because quite rightly they were saying, well, you're the new kids on the block and you're coming up with a set of products that are actually new technology. So a lot of them, quite rightly, were I'm going to trial it. We're going to trial it ourselves first. We're going to get our technical people deeply involved. You've got to prove it's high quality, it's resilient, it's robust, which is why, if you look from the launch date of some of our key products to when they really got motoring, that was an 18-month lag.
Yeah,
9 to 18 months.
We had this dilemma that we would say we're going to launch a product, we'd share it with the board, we'd share it with the market, we'd have a launch date, and then nothing would happen. Nothing would happen.
Absolutely
we'd look at the numbers, nothing moved.
You mean nobody sold it?
The
product was available.
The product's available, but of course, retailers have to gear themselves up to then take it to market. That would take another 3 months, 6 months. So then you have nothing happening, and we'd be telling the board, gosh, what's going on? You know, is it going to take off or isn't it? And then it would start to go.
Can I just scale this in my head? Because from memory, you got to about 1,000 partners, right? And if they had, say, an average of 5 sales guys each, suddenly you've got 5,000 sales
Feet on
guys
the
out
street,
there that you're not paying for. That's the scale of what happened here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's an incredibly clever thing to do, isn't it? Where do you get 5,000 sales guys from when you're not paying for them with that approach?
Yeah.
But did that fit all parts of the market, or was that better for the small? Let's do the UK. There's 2.5 million small and medium-sized enterprises, which is up to 250 employees, and then about 8,000 big businesses and government. Most of those, from memory, small ones, don't really do much with the top.
Correct. You can split the UK market very crudely into 3: small to medium-sized,
2 of them.
small to medium-sized businesses, enterprise, and public sector.
All right. Okay. Right.
And they're all different, and you get to them through different routes. So that the first X years of our development was all about targeting small to medium-sized businesses through our channel partners. Then when we decided, well, hold on a minute, there's a $3.5 billion market over here called public sector that we're not touching because our channel partners haven't got the relevant accreditations. At that point, we realised for that market, we had to do that ourselves.
And how did you do that?
We recruited direct salespeople and we got the right accreditations, and slowly but surely we started to win business. We did the easier stuff first, things like universities, schools, and then slowly got enough credibility and traction to move into government departments. I think that was about it, wasn't it?
Took some time,
It
but
did.
the public sector wants to buy from the asset-bearing provider. They don't want to buy from a reseller or a retailer. They want to be able to feel in touch who's got the product, and therefore very difficult for a reseller to get into that market. That's changed a bit actually in recent years, but that's how it was. That's how it was then.
And was there a point where, because the business developed over a decade or more as it got scaled, was there a point where you sort of realised how big the business could be? I mean, you know, the business was heading to 30 million of profit, 50 million of profit and beyond. Were there points where you sort of drew breath and thought, we can't do any more, it can't get any bigger? I mean, how does that work? Does it go in stages?
I don't think we did.
No, I think, again, I think it comes back to the product focus. Because we were so, I would probably say, obsessed with products and product sales and how do we get more of our channel partners to sell more of product XYZ? And then how do we get product XYZ into the public sector? That we just looked at milestones, right? Well, we want 10,000 units of that, and then we want 20,000 units of that, and then we want 40,000 units of that. So as that then flowed down to the P&L and EBITDA, well, that was great, but we were actually focused on the first bit.
But can I just talk about your products for a minute, right? Because if I look at what I did or what you did, it was very different. I tried to supply everything people needed, from IT support to cyber to calls and lines, broadband, everything. You guys didn't. You guys had a very clear idea of who you were going to be. So was that very deliberate that you kind of picked, I'm going to be good at this part of the market and I'm not going to try and do too many things?
Yes. So we realised early on that our partners would always work with 2 or 3 suppliers. So if you try and get 100% of that partner's cake, you're going to have to do an awful lot of things and you'll probably do half of them badly. So our view very early on was, well, let's be good at 2 or 3 things. As we grew, as we got more confidence, as we got more market share, it became 3 or 4, maybe 5 things. But we realised with 1,000 channel partners, you couldn't spread yourself thin across the entire product set of telecoms and then latterly and IT. It was just too much.
And I guess as you sort of addressed the market was big enough to have that approach, wasn't it? You could be a focus player with a relatively small product set servicing one part of a very, very big market. If the market was smaller, you probably couldn't do that.
Correct.
Or at least
Correct.
But we expanded the market. In my description, when we talked about having this box in the basement, You know, the businesses have a box in the basement that connects all the telephones in the basement, called a PBX. That box, we realised, could be provided in the cloud. We could provide everything in that box technically in our data centre. So we developed that product, and we were pretty much the first to market with that in the UK. And so the proposition to a business was, not only can we provide you connectivity on one line instead of two, but that box that you've got there that connects to all your 100, 200, whatever it is, office workers, we can replace that completely and do it better with more features and facilities than you've got, and for a lower price. So that then meant we were actually competing against likes of Siemens and Panasonic and the manufacturers of these boxes, who then began to struggle because they didn't have an alternative offering.
I think
and that really grew.
Listening, trying to pull out the lessons from that, I think one of the lessons that I'm getting from that, and it doesn't kind of matter what industry you're in, it is, and this sounds like the blindingly obvious, but I don't think it is. If you want to create £1 billion business, you've got to operate in a very big market.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Right. So that initial first question of how big is your market has got a very big influence on how big you're eventually going to go. And you went for a really big one.
We went for a really big one, but we also said credibly, from a product perspective, how much of that market can we take and at what stage?
And that evolves over time, though, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Because I guess you reached the point where you were no longer the disruptor and the challenger. You were a major player in the market.
Which culturally took some getting used to.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because we always saw ourselves as the new kids on the block, even when we'd achieved
So how do you
real
maintain
success.
that, though? How do you stay culturally within the organisation entrepreneurial, fleet of foot, when the business goes from, 10 people to 1,000 people and more? How do you achieve that?
Do you want to take that, Bob?
Yeah, well, it's a cultural one, really. You've got to try and keep the business light. Richard mentioned earlier on the systems. That's absolutely key. So many of our competitors had done lots of acquisitions. They changed the brand on the front door, to integrate them. But in reality, behind the scenes, all these IT systems still existed, and they didn't interwork, and they were problematic in terms of cost, service, ability to change, flexibility. So we were very keen to say we will have one set of systems. We had a policy of one. And that was very clear, very stated. Policy of one set of very clear IT systems that ran smoothly. That enables you to introduce new product much more quickly, much more easily than if you've got 10, 20. In fact, one company said we've got 35 different systems, and that's when we stopped counting. Yeah. And if you try and take a new product to market, trying to mount it on 35 different systems and supply the whole of the market is incredibly difficult. So that was key. So the business could introduce new products smoothly and easily, but we also ran the business in a particular way, so that we paced the introduction of new products very, very carefully. And it might be worth touching on that and how we operated.
Well, you guys are product guys. You were constantly doing things, but you didn't do it too quick. Is that what
We
you're
didn't do it too quickly. We ran the business not through the executive team. Effectively, we ran it through a series of steering groups, and this was quite fundamental, actually. So the main...
Let's just pause there for a sec. I mean, the vast majority of businesses are dominated by meetings between the senior management guys sitting down in a closed room trying to decide what to do. That's not what you did, is it?
No.
We had 2 key meetings every month that included a cross-section of the business, from Bob as CEO down to all kinds of other people.
Quite junior level.
Yeah, absolutely. One ran quality and the other ran product.
And these were open meetings where people could share views, and very much a kind of
that must be
consensual
really
style.
Yeah,
rather than,
it was collaborative.
This is quite fundamental. We both had experience in other businesses where we sat in as execs on an executive team, and the executive meetings you run for 8 hours typically, and you had a half an hour slot for finance and half an hour slot for product and half an hour slot, and it would be run tightly and it wouldn't overrun, and people would be proud if they could keep within the time. But in reality, there was never enough time for meaningful discussions.
There was never any dialogue.
And at any one time, half the exec are asleep because the sales guys aren't interested in operations and vice versa. So it doesn't really work. It always becomes pat. So rather than do that, what we did was everything that was important, we ran a steering group for. As Richard said, two big ones were the product and quality. We also ran regulatory, operations, and obviously finance. So there are about 5 of these steering groups.
That must have been a phenomenal experience for particularly the junior people to have
Well,
direct access to you.
Exactly. So in the product steering group, if we were going to debating the latest data product, then obviously the product director would be there, the technical guy would be there, but there'd be people that are developing it and are going to sell it. We'd be invited along or we'd come along. So you have a group of people that are relevant and can contribute,
But also,
as opposed to their position in the hierarchy. One thing we never had in Gamma, I forgot about this, Richard.
Go on.
We never had an organisation chart.
No.
For a very long time.
no, we were
No, that is
absolutely proud
unusual.
of never having it. And I remember a team of advisors came in and they said, "Can we have a look at the organisation chart?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Why?" I said, "Because we haven't got one." You could hear a pin drop. If you look at Gamma while I was there and while Bob was running it, it makes you realise that these people that say the culture of a company is nothing to do with the person that runs it is utter nonsense. The style and the individual of the CEO has a huge impact
It sets the pattern.
on the culture of the business. Absolutely huge impact.
Give us an example.
One of the things I'm probably the most proud of when I look back at the culture of Gamma was the respect that people had for the company's money. And it all came from this mean Scotsman sitting on my right. I'm exaggerating. We had all worked in telcos where the excess was eye-watering and disturbing. We never wanted to be
So
that
give us an
company.
example.
Well, I was ex-Global Crossing. I know somebody that got on a flight.
I was
Oh,
talking
sorry.
about other people wasting money. About
Oh, yeah, so
how you set the
I'll
culture
give you a classic
internally.
example. But most companies, when they float on the stock market, a lot will have a massive party, or the senior execs will go off site and do X, Y,
Trip
and Z.
to Las Vegas.
Las
or something.
Vegas,
Yeah.
a fantastic restaurant in London, and spend God knows what. We got a round of bacon sandwiches in the following day. Now, that sounds ridiculous.
We
but-
organised the bike ride as well.
and we organised a bike ride. But, our go-to place when we went on when we did big customer events the night before where it was just Gamma staff, we went to Wagamama's, whatever city we were in the UK. It was just the style, it was how we behaved. But in terms of controlling your costs and laying down a marker of this is the sort of business we are, it was quite significant.
I think humility is really important, not to get above yourself. Every year we ran a roadshow for our channel partners, and Ian, you would have attended some of these. And we'd be quite light-hearted at that. And we would often dress up or take a theme. And on one occasion the theme was castles. And Richard and I dressed up as knights. In armour and all the rest of it for it. But when we were rehearsing that, we walked through the office dressed as knights and through the software team. And I'll tell you this, the software team never even looked up.
They never even noticed.
We clanked
You
through in
walked through.
armour. The CEO and the CEO, dressed in armour, clanked through the office, past all the software guys. A quick glance and carried
that's
on.
a really important point because I know you guys really well. It was, apart from being the easiest to deal with and the most modern products, you also set out to be the most fun to deal with, right? And I think that's a massive lesson for everybody. Guys, we could talk to you forever, I think, because this is one of the all-time great stories. But I love the humility bit at the end of it. Just to respond to it, thanks for coming in. We'd like to now offer you a pub lunch. We can do at least a pint of lager and a sandwich. Anybody? We're in.
We're up for it.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Good
Ian.
to see you. Ian, I have to say, if Bob and Richard were in a pub, I wouldn't necessarily give them a second glance. But actually, they're as visionary a pair of entrepreneurs as probably anyone in the UK in the last 2 or 3 decades.
If you reckon that they had about 3 or 4 million sales in the early 2000s, and they've lived through the dot-com bubble bursting, the great financial crash in 2008, and they just powered on and on and on and never slowed down. I mean, the first bit that shocked me, I think, was they very rapidly got to 100 million sales and then said, we're in the wrong part of the market. How brave was that as a decision to say, actually, voice over internet's the future, kind of almost 15, 20 years ago, right? So it was an incredible decision to just pivot when you were growing so fast.
And they did all of that with, I'm not saying it's a one product company, right? But they did it with a very clear proposition for the marketplace they were serving. And they did it mainly organically. I think they might have done the odd acquisition. But it's really all about organic growth, wasn't it?
Yeah, the acquisitions were only in the much later years. I mean, they got to a point where they had nearly 5,000 people selling their products, but none of them were on their payroll because of the way they'd structured it, right, which was an incredible achievement to do, right? But also they then realised that if you're going to keep growing organically like that, then that worked for the small and medium-sized businesses. But if you wanted to go and sell to government and the giant enterprises, then they developed a special sales force for doing that. So they understand that one size doesn't fit all in terms of sales.
The thing that I love about the company and the way they articulated it was the culture, because they were the archetypal disruptor against, the big guys like BT, right? And then suddenly, at some point, there's this dawning realization that they're no longer a disruptor. They're becoming an incumbent, but they still maintain the culture.
I think one of the bits that I hadn't quite thought through before was how they use computer systems to aid the culture. They said, we're a product company, and everything we launch will be using one system only. You're not allowed to develop systems. And most people, if they've got 12 products, have got 12 sets of systems. When you keep it really, really simple, it's then very easy to explain the culture to your staff. So the way that the whole approach to the business became the way that they kept the culture all the way through, from like 80 people to 1,800.
And the way the culture is articulated to the customer is through service, isn't it? That great example of how, 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon when everyone in BT's gone home, they're still there, still loving the customer. So it really is, but however technical the business is, it really is about customer service.
Yeah, what's fascinating is there's another episode in this series where we talk to Maxine Laceby, and she's in Collagen. These guys are in voice over internet, but they've both got this mythical customer. I think they call this one Tracy, right? So it doesn't matter what industry you're in, that's the way you do it.
So look, they buy a business for peanuts in a very bad market. We're not in great economic times now. Do you think another Gamma is around the corner? Someone will find assets for peanuts and grow another business the scale of Gamma? Maybe you and I should do it, Ian.
If somebody's going to do it, it always happens. I think the other thing that helped them as well is, and this is probably a lesson for investors, their investors didn't ask them constantly, what did you do last month? They asked them constantly, where are you going to be in 18 months' time? Now, if you can find some investors like that, please send them round.
It's a lesson for us all.
It's a lesson for us all, yeah.